A man walks into a bar filled with people, noise, music, and cameras watching every entrance and exit, and somehow he is never seen leaving. No misframe, no blurry figures slipping past. Nothing. It's as if, in the middle of a crowded building, surrounded by witnesses, he simply stopped existing. And the most unsettling part is this. Everything about that night started out completely normal. On April 1st, 2006, 27-year-old Brian Shaffer was doing what millions of people do every weekend. He was going out to unwind. There was no sign that anything was about to go wrong. No indication that this would be the last night anyone would ever see him. Brian was a medical student at Ohio State University. Someone who had spent years working toward a demanding career. He was intelligent, driven, and by all accounts, easy to be around. Friends described him as social, someone who could blend into any environment comfortably. He had plans lined up, including an upcoming trip during his break from school. From the outside, his life looked structured, moving forward in a clear direction. But beneath that, there was something heavier. Just weeks earlier, Brian had lost his mother after a long battle with cancer. It was the kind of loss that doesn't just pass quietly. It lingers. It changes how a person moves through the world. People close to him noticed it. He still showed up, still talked, still went out, but there was a subtle shift, a quiet weight behind everything he did. And sometimes the people who appear the most normal are the ones carrying something no one else can fully see. That night, Brian met up with his friend William Clint Florence. The plan was simple: go out, have drinks, relax. Nothing unusual. They moved to the city like anyone else would on a Saturday night, going from one bar to another, blending into the rhythm of crowds and conversations. Music spilling out onto the streets. People moving in groups, laughter cutting through the noise. Hours passed without anything standing out. Eventually, they made their way to a place called the Ugly Tuna Saloona, a popular bar located inside the South Campus Gateway complex. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't isolated. It was a kind of place where hundreds of people passed through in a single night. To get inside, you had to take an escalator up to the entrance, and at the top of that escalator were surveillance cameras. Cameras positioned to capture everyone coming in and everyone going out. At around 1:15 a.m., Brian was captured on that footage entering the bar with Clint and Clint's girlfriend. He looks completely normal, relaxed, walking at an easy pace. There's no hesitation, no sign of distress, nothing that would make you stop and think this moment mattered. He steps into the bar like everyone else that night, just another face in the crowd. Inside, the environment was exactly what you'd expect. Loud music echoing through the space. Dim lighting making it hard to see clearly beyond a few feet. People packed close together, moving, talking, drinking. It's the kind of place where minutes blur together, where you lose track of time without realizing it. And in a setting like that, it's incredibly easy to lose track of people too. At some point during the night, Brian became separated from Clint and his girlfriend. It wasn't unusual. In a crowded bar, it happens all the time. You assume you'll run into each other again. Maybe someone steps outside. Maybe they're at the bar ordering drinks. Maybe they're talking to someone new. There's no reason to worry. But this is where things begin to shift in a way no one notices at the time. As the night moved closer to closing, Brian was seen again, this time near the entrance area of the bar. This moment is important because it becomes one of the last confirmed sightings of him. He was talking to two women. The interaction appeared casual, almost effortless. There was no visible tension, no urgency in his movements. If anything, he seemed comfortable, engaged in the moment like anyone else would be late into the night. The conversation didn't appear unusual, just another brief connection between strangers in a crowded space. Then, something small happened, something so minor that, at the time, it meant absolutely nothing. Brian stepped away. He moved out of the camera's view, just for a moment, not running, not rushing, just stepping out of frame, the same way people do hundreds of times in a place like that. The camera continued recording. People moved in and out of view. Conversations continued. Music played. Nothing stopped. Nothing changed. Except Brian never came back into frame. At first, that doesn't seem strange. Cameras don't capture everything. People move around. They step out of view and reappear somewhere else. It's normal. But as time passed, something became impossible to ignore. Every other person who entered that bar that night was eventually seen leaving. Hundreds of people passed by those cameras on their way out. Faces, movements, groups, individuals, all recorded as they exited the same way they came in. But not Brian. Investigators would later go through footage over and over again, slowing it down, watching every second, every frame, looking for even the smallest sign that they had missed him. A glimpse, a shadow, a partial figure blending into a crowd. Anything that could explain how he left. There was nothing. No matter how many times they watched it, no matter how closely they analyzed every movement, one fact remained unchanged. Brian Shaffer walked into that bar, but he was never seen walking out. And in a place where the only visible exit was being monitored, where hundreds of other people were clearly recorded leaving, that shouldn't be possible. It doesn't fit. It doesn't make sense. Because for him to disappear like that, something had to happen in the small gap between what the cameras captured and what they didn't. And whatever that moment was, it happened in silence, unnoticed, in the middle of a crowded room full of people with no idea they were witnessing the beginning of a mystery that would never be solved. Because from that point on, Brian Shaffer was gone. At first, nothing felt urgent. When the bar closed and people began to leave, Clint assumed Brian had already gone. It was the kind of assumption you make without thinking. In a crowded place like that, it's normal to lose track of someone. You expect they stepped outside or met someone or decided to head home early. There was no reason at that moment to believe anything was wrong. But as minutes turned into hours, that assumption started to fall apart. Clint tried calling Brian. No answer. He called again. Still nothing. At first, it wasn't alarming. Loud bar, dead phone battery. Maybe he just couldn't hear it. But as more time passed, the silence became harder to ignore. Brian wasn't responding. He wasn't showing up anywhere. And the longer it went on, the more that quiet uncertainty began to shift into something heavier. By the next day, it was clear this wasn't normal. Brian hadn't come home. He hadn't contacted anyone. No one had seen him after that moment inside the bar. That's when concern turned into something more serious. A missing person report was filed, and investigators began piecing together the last known moments of his night. And almost immediately, everything led back to one place: the ugly tuna saloon. Surveillance footage became the center of the investigation. In cases like this, cameras are supposed to simplify things. They give you a timeline. They confirm movements. They show you where someone went. But in this case, the footage did the opposite. It created a mystery that shouldn't exist. Investigators started with what they knew. Brian entered the bar at around 1:15 a.m. That was confirmed. Clear footage. No doubt about it. Later, he was seen again near the entrance, talking to two women. That was also confirmed. And then nothing. So they kept watching. They replayed the footage from the entrance over and over again. Every person who walked out was visible. Groups of friends leaving together. Individuals making their way down the escalator. People lingering. People rushing. People clearly intoxicated. People completely steady. The camera captured all of it, except Brian. They slowed the footage down, frame by frame, looking for anything. A missed second, a blocked angle, a moment where he could have slipped past unnoticed. but there was no gap, no clear blind spot large enough to explain it. The entrance was continuously monitored, and every other person who entered eventually exited through that same path. But Brian didn't. That's when investigators started to consider something that made the situation even more unsettling. If he didn't leave through the main exit, then he had to have gone somewhere else, which meant there had to be another way out. The building itself became part of the investigation. At the time, the South Campus Gateway Complex had areas under construction. That detail might not seem important at first, but it opened up possibilities. There were service corridors, back hallways, employee-only areas, and potential exits that weren't visible to the public, and more importantly, weren't covered by surveillance cameras in the same way the main entrance was. So the question became, could Brian have slipped into one of those areas? It's possible, in a crowded, chaotic environment. It wouldn't be difficult for someone to move away from a main area and into a space that wasn't meant for customers. A wrong turn, a moment of curiosity, or even intentionally trying to leave through a quieter route. If he had done that, he could have exited the building without ever being seen on camera. But that theory creates a new problem, because even if he managed to leave the building unnoticed, what happened after that? There were no witnesses who saw him outside, no reports of a disturbance, no signs of a struggle, no evidence left behind. It's as if, even beyond the cameras, he continued to vanish. Investigators also focused on the people Brian interacted with that night. The two women he was last seen speaking to were identified and interviewed. Their accounts were consistent. The interaction was brief, casual, nothing out of the ordinary. They didn't notice anything strange about his behavior. No signs that he was distressed, no indication that he planned to leave in an unusual way. To them, it was just another conversation in a crowded bar. Clint, his friend, was also questioned. His timeline matched what investigators had already established. There were no contradictions, no suspicious gaps, nothing that pointed toward involvement. And yet, even after eliminating the obvious possibilities, the core question remained untouched. Where did Brian go? As the investigation continued, another detail emerged that added even more confusion. Brian's phone, which had gone silent after that night, suddenly showed activity days later. It rang, not a voicemail notification, not a delayed message. It actually rang, but when it was answered, there was nothing. No voice, no sound, just silence. That moment raised serious questions. Phones don't just turn back on and ring without a reason. Either it was a technical glitch, or someone had the phone. And if someone had the phone, that meant Brian wasn't the only thing that had disappeared. But without any follow-up activity, without any traceable signal, it became just another loose thread in a case filled with them. Then came the theories. At first, investigators focused on the most logical explanation, that Brian had left the bar through an unseen exit and something happened afterward. Maybe he encountered someone outside. Maybe there was an accident. Maybe something went wrong in a place where no one was looking. It's a theory that fits, but only partially. Because even in those situations, you expect to find something. Evidence, witnesses, a trail, but there was nothing. Another possibility is that Brian chose to disappear. It's a theory that divides people. On one hand, he had everything going for him, a future, a career, plans. But on the other hand, he was dealing with a significant emotional loss. The death of his mother had changed him. And sometimes, people reach a point where they want to escape everything. That night could have given him the perfect opportunity. A crowded bar, a moment out of sight, a chance to walk away without anyone noticing. But if that's what happened, why leave everything behind? No financial activity, no contact with friends or family, no confirmed sightings anywhere. It's not just a disappearance, it's a complete erasure. And maintaining that level of disappearance for years is almost impossible without leaving some kind of trace. Then there's the darker possibility that something happened inside the bar, not in a way that anyone noticed, not something loud or obvious, but something quick, contained and hidden in a crowded space. It's possible for things to happen without drawing attention. A brief altercation, a wrong interaction, a moment that escalates quietly. And if that's the case, then the question becomes even more disturbing. How does something like that happen in a room full of people without anyone realizing it? And even if it did, how does someone remove all evidence of it so completely? Every theory seems to answer one part of the mystery, while creating another. And that's what makes this case so difficult to understand. No matter which direction you follow, you eventually reach a point where the explanation stops making sense. Years have passed since that night, and the case remains unsolved. Investigators have revisited it, re-examined the footage, re-interviewed witnesses, explored new angles. But nothing has changed the core fact that defines this entire mystery. Brian Shaffer walked into that bar, and he never walked out. Not on camera, not in witness accounts, not in any way that can be proven or explained. It's the kind of case that challenges something fundamental. The idea that in a world filled with cameras, people can't just disappear. That there's always a record, always a trace, always something left behind. But this case proves otherwise. Because whatever happened in that brief moment when Brian stepped out of view happened in a way that bypassed everything. Every camera, every person, every system we rely on to make sense of events like this. And nearly 2 decades later, we're still left with the same question. How does someone vanish in a place where it should be impossible? What do you think really happened to Brian Shaffer? Did he find a way out that no one noticed? Or did something happen in that space between what we can see and what we can't? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you're drawn to mysteries that don't make sense, the kind that stay with you long after the video ends, make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video. Because some cases aren't just unsolved, they're unexplained.